And a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're on the airwaves. Tony Chatman, how are you doing, sir?
Randy, I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, I want to get right into this because I have so much to talk to you about, and you have so much wisdom to bring to the airwaves today. I was thinking before we connected, you and I have both been on this planet for a long time. Can we both agree that the last 3 months between the coronavirus and George Floyd, these have been some unique times?
You forgot murder hornets. You said you skipped right over the murder hornets. Yeah.
Damn it.
We're in, we're waiting. I'm thinking sometime around September, October, we're going to have Mothra and Godzilla just pop up on the scene. I mean, I've never in my adult life seen anything like what we're going through right now.
It is bizarre, and I always hate saying that. And then, of course, the murder hornets are going to be invading soon, and that will end everything. So, no, good point. Good one. I wanted to talk to you about George Floyd. You've had a lot of time to think about this since this horrible thing happened. What's your take on it?
Which part do you want me to start with?
The actual alleged murder of George Floyd. That's what I would call it.
Okay. I would start off with, I think, full disclosure, I have not watched the full 8 minutes and 46 seconds, okay? Mostly because I can't. I honestly can't. I mean, this is many black people that I talk to, and I use the phrase black. I'll get into why black and not African American maybe later, but many of the black people I talk to, it's hard to watch that because it's very visceral, and many of us have been in experiences where that could have very easily been our fate. Like, I watched just parts of that, and I just kind of went back in time to very specific incidents where I thought, man, that could have very easily been me. And then number two, it's a PTSD response. It's a trauma. And so there's something so powerful about that, even more so than some of the other killings that we've seen on video. Just, you have this period of time and you're literally watching the whole thing unfold. And at the same time, you're watching an officer seemingly take pleasure in it. Honestly, that's part of the thing. Is it wasn't I'm concerned about your life. It was, this is exactly what I intend to do. That it makes it for myself and many others just beyond what we've seen on real TV versus, maybe something in a movie or TV.
Well, it's a really good observation, and it's a very honest observation because as a white guy, I feel the same way. You just think to yourself, and, not to over examine this, but you're just thinking of somebody just think of in the days like when you and I used to wrestle and somebody'd be bending your arm to the point you thought it was going to break. The other person always, all right, eased up on it. When somebody is saying, I can't breathe, you just think that you just move your knee just a little bit, just a hair where you go, okay, he can breathe now. That's the weird part to me.
Yeah. And, honestly, this is played over and over and over and over again. I mean, you're seeing, even in the last week, more reports of the exact same thing of people saying, I can't breathe, and the officer not relenting. And, I think, going back, though, to George Floyd, him crying out to his dead mother, there's something about that. In the midst of dying, still referring to the officer as sir. I mean, there's so much to unpack there that just make this so hard to digest, right? And so, like you said, I wrestled. I trained in martial arts even to this day. I mean, there's a point where you're very aware of, safety, pain, and danger, right? And where you're crossing it. And to just have no regard for that is just, it's hard to digest when it's coming from someone with that type of legal authority.
So I think we can agree it doesn't matter if you're white, you're black, or you're just a human being. We all look at the video of this and we are just deeply saddened. But you know what I worry about? I worry about, is this going to change anything? And here's why I say this, Tony. I feel kind of like this way with the gun issue. Think about it. We have school shootings. We go through this mourning period. People light candles. They march in the streets. And universally, people want further background checks with the guns. I mean, it's like 80% people want changes, at least in the gun laws, not taking the guns away, but they want changes. And then after the school shooting, it just kind of disappears. People go back to work, go back to school, and we wait for the next school shooting. Are we going to see that with the George Floyd situation? It'll just kind of disappear.
There's no way to actually predict that, unfortunately. And at first, I had that same feeling. But this moment seems really different. I mean, so just like we said, we've never seen anything like the last 3 months. I've never seen anything like the last 2 weeks either, where number one, the protest, just the optics of it looked very different. In the past, it wasn't homogenous. It wasn't all black, but there were sprinkles of diversity throughout, right? Now, the protests are every age group, every nationality, every color. I went to a protest on Sunday. We did a march, and it's me.
And by the way, for everybody watching around the world, you're in Manhattan, so they understand you're in New York.
I'm in Manhattan.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm in Manhattan. I'm in New York. Yeah, and it's me, and I am marching next to a guy. I'm not a small guy by any stretch, but I'm marching next to a guy with a sign, about equality, who's probably like 6'3", 330 with an Iron Maiden shirt on. And I'm an Iron Maiden fan, so that's a totally different story. But, you watch, that was never the demographics of this. And
true point.
So number one, you see the racial diversity and the gender diversity and the age diversity of it. You see the fact that it's not just one or two marches, but it's really taken over our entire country, not just in major metropolitan areas, but now it's starting to pop up in the smaller towns and more rural areas. Even people, I've seen pictures of just one person out there protesting by themselves because this is their thing. And it's taken on a global response. I mean, you see, massive crowds in different parts of the world. There's something extremely different about this. And it feels different than Columbine. It feels different than Sandy Hook. It feels different than Rodney King or Trayvon Martin. It feels, and I will also say there is a younger generation, that Generation Z that's come up, that is full of energy, full of anger that this has not been changed yet. And really, they're in many ways a driving force. I don't know whether this thing is just going to die out. And I don't know if people understand what the long haul looks like for this to really go and really become change. But man, this one's different.
Yeah, that's interesting what you said. And I think I almost hear a glimmer of hope in your voice with what you're saying. The guy wearing the Iron Maiden T-shirt, a lot of white folk out there, blacks, Hispanic, gays, women, men, where you're kind of seeing everyone on the same page or similar pages where we're all going, yeah, this has gone too far.
Yeah, and can I say something else about that that's interesting? Here's what that's going to create. And this is not anything that's always been intentional, but it happens. I think in the past, we've seen protesters get dispersed by police and maybe even National Guard. And yet, because those people don't look like us, it's easier to go, man, that's really bad, but not have that emotional connection to it, right? But now you're seeing, a man in a wheelchair who happens to be white, who gets shot in the face with a rubber bullet. You're seeing, young Hispanic women getting tear gassed. What you're really seeing is you're seeing people that eventually will look like you getting treated this way. And it's very different optics, and it's easier to be empathetic. I mean, and it's not, I don't want to get into the morality of it. It's human nature. It's a lot easier to be empathetic when you see someone who looks like you going through it and it's causing a greater bubbling up. And so I would say what it's really doing is it's starting to eliminate that middle ground. You kind of have to pick a side now on this one, because now you can see it and you have to either choose to ignore it or choose to do something about it.
No, it's a really solid point, because I think it's like so many issues in life, until it affects you, you kind of go, whatever. What are they complaining about? But when you realize that a bullet or tear gas could hit you and affect you, and then you start thinking about, what if that was me, pinned to the ground? I think this one has definitely a much deeper and wider impact than some of the other cases you had mentioned.
Yeah. And, so come back to that. What if it was me? Right. So let me share a story. My college training was, I was a chemical engineer. Right. So that's my first internship. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we go to Atlanta for the weekend. When I say we, I actually mean my boss and myself. We're going to entertain some customers, and we were out till quite late. My boss had way too much to drink. And so I'm driving back to Charlotte, through Georgia. And I remember stopping at a Waffle House to get him some coffee because he had really had too much to drink. And I remember seeing this police car just kind of drive through the parking lot. And, I noticed it because it didn't look right. But I said, is what it is. Got in the car, mile down the road, we get pulled over by that police car. I'm asked to step out of the car. We walk, and I thought about it yesterday. We didn't just walk out of the car. We walked about 20 yards behind the car, right, which is very abnormal. And he starts to tell me that the car that I'm driving has been reported as stolen, and basically that I'm going to jail, right? And in just, I wasn't even thinking, I'm like, oh, wait, that's not my issue. This is a company car. And I immediately go and I pull my drunk boss out of the car, right? And then I have him, they start talking, and I sit in the car, and then it hits me that I'm not supposed to be alive. This was the entire intention of this moment, was because the car wasn't reported as stolen. It's his company car. It's registered in his name. No, this was the moment that I was supposed to disappear off the face of the earth. And had he not been in the car with me, I wouldn't be here. And that type of thing is replayed over and over again. I think sometimes people think, well, it's because of this person or this thing or this. I have sat in the middle of Kansas, full suit and tie, on the curb while police have basically searched my car. It doesn't matter how I'm dressed. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. My skin color matters. And so now I go back and I look at George Floyd and I think, yeah, that when I say that could have been me, or when I say that could have been one of my two sons because they've been police profiled already, I don't mean that in some theoretical way. I mean, in that moment, had I not immediately darted, and there's a part of me that thinks, I was surprised I did it, but I think the officer was surprised I did it, because I think had he been clear-minded, he may have just shot me before I got to the car. So when I say that really could happen to me, and when many black folk, when we get together and we have these conversations, the vast majority of us have these stories. This is not like some anomaly. This is pretty universal for us. So when we look at, actually physically seeing or visibly seeing what happens, it's a different animal for us. And that's why for us it's different, but then to see it bubble up with everybody else, that does give me a glimmer of hope.
No, and I don't think you're ever going to convince white people, the average or above average income white person, how you feel about that. They don't understand because they have never felt that intimidation like what you felt and your friends feel and your family feel. So it's almost futile because a lot of folks just don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, but you know what? So something else that gives me hope. The other thing that I'm seeing in the last 10 days is people actually want to talk about this now. right, in a way that I've never seen. So I actually work with organizations dealing with unconscious bias and how people process information and how that affects, inclusion and inequity. And I do it in a variety of sectors. But I am now really seeing people who this was not a priority. And I mean, as organizations, but also mean as individuals who are like, wait a second, how did I miss this for years? And there's a willingness to talk. There's a receptivity to the conversation. I mean, yeah, there's still defense mechanisms. That's human nature. But that also gives me hope. Do I believe that there are people that you'll never convince? Absolutely. But I also believe more than I believed 3 months ago that there are a lot more people that are convincible than, what the optics would tell you. I mean, I really think, and I also think that's part of the solution, right? These conversations, whether they're done in groups or whether they're done one-on-one, to a receptive ear, and the stories and the narratives, and that this is not just a one-off. Okay, I can share you that story, but then I can share with you 8 more stories. It's not just an anomaly. And that you start hearing these over and over again. I was on a panel discussion last night, and the moderator said to all the panelists, okay, how many of you have ever, been profiled by the police? All of us raise our hand. How many of you have ever been handcuffed? How many of you have ever, and you start going this, and you're like, and the people are going, wait a second, I've known you for years and didn't know that. I think that's really opening up a door of conversation, a door of understanding, and maybe even a door of empathy.
I want to talk with you about protesting and looting. Such a great subject. I love it over cocktails. You probably saw the video or recent video of the cops in Chicago. I think it was taken around, I think it was on CCTV. And it was cops just laying down, some of them eating popcorn, drinking coffee. And Chicago was being looted. Cops were just doing nothing, not even responding. Did you see that video? And do you know what I'm talking about? And is that, should we be concerned about that?
So not only did I see that video, so I lived in Chicago for 20 years.
Yeah, that's my hometown too. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there you go. So a friend of mine, a very close friend who just came and visited right before COVID hit, was actually helping to clean up that mess that we're discussing. I know that congressperson. I know a lot of congresspeople in Chicago. So that's a very disturbing moment. If you're not aware of what happened, just check social media. Because, and not only were they lying around this congressperson's office, they were basically stealing from the congressperson. I mean, everything from taking belongings to making coffee and popcorn while all this is going on. I mean, it's beyond reprehensible. There's so much more to talk about in this thing. But, I think that there are some really strong concerns when you look at something like that going on, as you're talking about. I don't want to use the phrase civil unrest. I'd rather use the phrase social disruption. The social disruption is happening, that these are the people that are being paid to do a job. I mean, that's really bad.
Yeah, it's some incredible video, and we're gonna see more of this kind of stuff that is just going to be popping up, revealing sort of like an onion that you just tear a little bit away, and the more you tear away, the more you find out it's rotten. But it doesn't show the Chicago Police Department in a good light, and it shows what they were doing. Let's break this.
Can I throw
ahead.
One more in there? So there's another incident that's not being very well publicized. So there was a moment where the protesters were doing a lot of things, and there's a lot of questions of how the incident exploded, but the police ended up beating a protester, and a gentleman tried to jump in and intervene, and the police began beating him, right? The person that was trying to intervene is the president of the Chicago Police Review Board. I mean, he is one of their own. And even as he's saying who he is, they continue to beat him because they didn't see blue. They saw black in that moment. And, there's the articles are starting to come out. I know this because I'm somewhat connected to this situation, but It's the interesting thing is, so there's a song by a gentleman named Gil Scott-Heron, right? It's called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," and it's the whole idea of, as all this stuff is happening, you won't get to see it because it's not what helps to sell to sponsors. I don't think Gil ever realized that there would be social media, and so now all this stuff that would have been edited out by a lot of mainstream media, we're getting to see firsthand from the ground level, and it changes our perspective of it. So
I want to see your position on. Let's start with looting. I'm breaking into a Nike store. I'm breaking into an Apple store. I'm stealing. I'm going to take whatever I can. I'm white. I'm black. I'm Chinese. What do we do when that occurs? We see it happening. They're running out. What should the police, the authorities do?
Well, okay, that's such a complex thing right now. So, and I appreciate you bringing the fact that, it's multiple races doing it, because it's very clear in the first 3 or 4 days of the protests that the looting was done by non-protesters.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
But folks, stay focused here. What do we do with those people when we see it? Because people want answers to it.
Well, I think that's where I'm kind of getting to. So you have to be able to say that looting in and of itself is illegal. But here's the problem, though. And this is always the problem. The police should arrest the looters, without question. But there's a difference between arresting the looters and attacking the protesters.
Yeah.
Right? So making sure that we arrest the looters, we deal with that. That is really critical.
But are we all on the same page? If we see the looter, he or she is walking out with stuff, or they're in the store, do they have the right to pin them to the ground, not put a knee in their throat? But if it means that they're fighting the police, do you agree the police have a right to do what they need to do without killing the person? We can agree on that, to stop
illegal.
that and arrest them.
Yeah, it's the police do. I don't think, because there's also plenty of videos of the protesters trying to stop the looters.
Right.
I think it's very dangerous for the protesters to do it.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you have no problem with that, because I think there's been a lot of, we saw what the mayor in your city just kind of, I don't know what he was doing during that time, but kind of, I think, had a, standoff mentality of, people on Fifth Avenue, Macy's stores. I mean, places that normally don't even get hit like this. And I think the mayor just said, I ain't touching this. And I think a lot of folks then get angry about that, because either we're going to have a society of laws and you can't break these laws, or we're going to just say anarchy is here and do whatever you can do, justify it in some way that you've been mistreated, and go steal what you got to steal.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, though, we got to circle back around and talk about the narrative of that one. So there's a difference between looting and theft. Okay. There is, and I'm saying this for a reason. All of the evidence has come out that what happened on Fifth Avenue was a coordinated theft. And what they did is and I think that's the key, because it's easy when we use the word looting to still connect them to the protest. But what we're seeing is it's almost like in a movie where the criminals create some event that's a diversion, and all the police go there so that now the criminals can go and they can get what they want to. Like, there's a holdup over here, the police go over here, now we're going to rob the bank we really want. It's documented now, right there. You have lookouts on bikes. It was a coordinated attack, so that while all of this protest was going on and all of the police presence was there, you actually had people who their main focus was, now let's go rob Chanel. Let's go rob, Barney's. Let's go rob, all of these high-end places. And so I want to make sure that as we talk about this idea of justice and right and wrong, that we understand we are talking about, and even in Minneapolis, they're showing, there was not only were the protesters infiltrated by people who want anarchy, but there were a criminal underground that also infiltrated for a variety of reasons. So to make sure that people say, okay, these are actually criminals who try to take advantage of the situation, not people who are in any way affiliated with protesters. And so we shouldn't link those two ideas together.
But either way, the destruction of property or stealing, you're not in favor of.
You know what? I'll tell you what I feel. I am not in favor of the stealing of property.
So kicking in the...
I'm not... Let me finish, though. I am not in favor of the destruction of property, but I understand it.
I actually agree with you.
Yeah. I don't think people understand how angry Black people really have been, how much people have really endured, how much people have not been listened to. And I think all of us have had a moment where we were so mad we wanted to throw something or punch a wall, and maybe have. And that was a singular individual, often on a singular event. What you're seeing is you are seeing the results of decades and centuries of being mistreated. And I think what is mind-blowing is that with all of this that's happened, that Black people want equality and not revenge. So I totally get that it is wrong and that there should not be a destruction of property, but I also totally get why it's happening. I totally get it.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right on that. It's not they are excusing it, but you can understand that underlying tone that people are so fed up and they're tired and they're exhausted and they're weary and a lifetime of being mistreated that maybe without breaking some windows, nobody would even care.
Well, yeah, that's the other question, right? If it was just a peaceful protest, it could be easily ignored. And at some point, do you stick with principle or do you go to pragmatism? So there is that question.
I think we're on the same page on that. I want to talk about statues, Tony. Statues. It's been a big story lately in the last couple days. As an African American, as a hardworking citizen of New York, should these statues come down?
So I have a very controversial view of this. I will say that right off the bat. Because I've heard people say the statue should come down because of what they're glorifying. And I've heard the other side that say the statue should stay up because of history, right? And I'm kind of in the middle. I actually believe the statues should stay up. I don't believe they should come down. But I believe the inscriptions need to be changed. So instead of someone being, a general for such and such army, I think we need to look at it in terms of the reality of history and say, no, this person led a treasonous attack against the United States of America. And I think if you really want to protect history, you don't take the statues down, but you change the narrative of the statues so that it says this is what really happens. And now this person is no longer glorified, they're vilified, but the statue remains.
That's a really interesting take, and I haven't heard that. I'm on the same page with you. I think the problem you're going to run into if you're going to start yanking all these statues down and knocking them down, and citizens are ripping them apart, and I guess then where do you finish off at? Do you get angry at George Washington because he was a slave owner? Do we get angry with Thomas Jefferson? Do we start tearing up the money and putting new faces on it? And even in modern times, people that we all, I guess, somewhat idolize or we put praise to. If we start going through everyone's library of mistakes, I don't think there's going to be anyone to make a monument of, No,
yeah, right, Randy. I agree with you. I think that the reality is there's no such thing as a perfect ally. That we're going to have to be able to say We have to have alliances and allegiances with people that we know are not perfect, but still, want the same end goal in that. So I think that that's part of it. I also think this is a moment in time. This is, we talked earlier about, is this going to create real change? And the answer is, I have no idea. But whenever you have a problem that's been ignored for this long, the first response is always an overcorrection, right? And so what we're seeing right now is an overcorrection in many ways. And I don't know which parts are an overreaction and an overcorrection, but that's going to happen until you start to see the needle move, and things will then start to shift back over. So it shouldn't be surprising, because when the Berlin Wall fell, it's very similar, right? When apartheid collapses, and even from what I've been seeing recently, what we're seeing is very similar to South Africa before apartheid collapsed. I mean, it has very similar optics to it. But, this is that radical shift happened first. And it was an overcorrection, but it started to move the needle. And so, to some extent, that's not super surprising that it's happening this way.
Some chatter that I've been hearing, and I was interested in this, and I really just heard it like today. I didn't know this. 13 years ago, Floyd was charged with aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon in 2009. You probably knew about this. Floyd served a 5-year prison sentence as part of a plea deal in the 2007 charge of an aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. I'm sure a lot of this is coming from the police department and those trying to side with the officers. My question, should we even care what George Floyd did in the past?
No, what does it have to do with what happened to that day? It has nothing to do with it, right? I mean, if you're going to go through that, then what we really need to do is go through the records of each of these police officers also and say, okay, what is their history of abuse? Because that's it. But then, there is the reality that, okay, we just talked about a lot of people aren't perfect, right? And not only that, when you look at statistically, if you and I speed the same amount of times, I'm far more likely to get arrested for it, or at least a ticket, than you are. That's just a statistical reality. So yeah, none of this stuff matters. What matters is, how does that contribute to that day? But what that does, what's fascinating is, and I know, you didn't bring it up for that reason, but what's interesting is there's a lot of people who need to hear that as a confirmation of, see, that's how Black people are.
Right.
And so then there's a reason to police them, which is, it's a dangerous thought. And I feel I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up right now, okay? Because you're going to hear me challenge the police a lot, okay? You're going to hear me question their tactics. You're going to hear me challenge what Chicago Police Department did. You're going to hear me challenge how the police and National Guard respond to looters, because there's a lot of studies that come out and show that really the number one determinant that's going to figure into whether a protest becomes violent and looting is actually the response by the police. I mean, it's a lot there, right? But I also think it's important for your listeners to understand this. I work with a lot of law enforcement. Okay, so I work with Homeland Security. I've worked in the past with Secret Service. I work with a lot of federal law enforcement. I actually helped distribute and craft some police responses after the George Floyd murder. Okay, I think that's important. People say, some of my best friends are Black, but literally a large portion of my friend group are LEOs, law enforcement officers. I mean, and when I say friends, I mean, we plan cruises together. So I want to make sure that that's also understood. I understand both worlds, and I'm not just the Black person who had bad experiences with the police, and so I only have this myopic viewpoint.
You bring up some interesting points there, and you and I have been talking about the Black perspective. We have, it might be half this country of the white perspective, that people are going to say things like, Black people are racist. It's not fair. I go to church. I do all the right things. I like Jay-Z. I like King James. I like Beyonce, is what many of these white people would say. But I think you've got a big chunk of the American public. This is an undertone and a white perspective of rumblings I hear from people. What do these black people want? What do they want? And I don't know how you change that, but what would you say to them when they say it's not fair? They get a black Miss America pageant. This is how this group of people feels, that it is unfair. It's not equal. And I don't mean to laugh about it, but it just sounds sometimes absurd. Are black people racist?
I think you have to define racist, and I'm going to come back to the other part you said.
Well, racist.
Black people, Black people can be biased, but racism, as defined by almost every term, involves bias plus power. And so it's one thing if I have a bias or a prejudice, but it's another thing if I can use that prejudice to wield power and influence over your life, your safety, your ability to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of those things. That's really, from every definition, and even Merriam-Webster has recently said we have to change our definition because it's not right. That's what every definition of racism really involves. And so, there's a big difference between feeling like, this black person doesn't like me versus feeling like, you know what, my life is in danger. And so that's part of when you say, are black people racist? People don't understand what racism is. And, really being able to go down and talk about it in those terms are really important.
But you heard some of the comparisons that I made there, that what a large group of white people feel, they feel like it's not fair, and that black people are prejudiced towards them. Is there anything to this?
I'm always fascinated by that. And so here, I hear the rumblings. I do not have a friend group of only people who agree with me. Okay, so I end up in some of these discussions. I'm always fascinated by what part is not fair. So people say this isn't fair. My question is, so what's not fair? So explain to me, is it, well, it's not fair. Like you mentioned, a black Miss America pageant, or there's black colleges. And it's like, okay, your understanding of why it's not fair is based on insufficient knowledge. So let's talk about it, right? Why were these schools built? Because black people couldn't get into the other schools. Well, people say, well, why do they still exist? And here's what, this will blow your mind. There are a larger percentage of white students at black colleges than there are black students at other colleges. Okay? There's a larger percentage of white students at black colleges than there are black students at white colleges. There's a larger percentage of white faculty at black colleges than there are black faculty at white colleges, which is why in the industry, those non-black colleges are referred to as PWI, predominantly white institutions, right? And the truth is that phrase can go way beyond colleges. You could talk about almost any company, right? You look at the boardroom, that boardroom is a PWI, a predominantly white institution. You can look at, and in fact, it's so strange that if a person walked in and saw all black people, they would think something was wrong. But if they walked in and saw all white people, they wouldn't think about it, right? And so it's really to be able to say, okay, let's talk through it. The worst thing, and I've learned this because I'm very pragmatic in these situations, the worst thing I could do is get upset and get into a meaningless argument, waste of time. But let's look at the information and the data, because I come from an engineering background. Data is really important. When we start saying, black people are more likely to be criminals, let's look at the data because it doesn't show that. Let's look, when you start breaking down the data, the problem is that people have been more influenced by propaganda than by true information and by accurate information. And so I believe that for some people, accurate information will help them get through it. I believe that for some people, they could care less because they just want the propaganda to really go and confirm what they already believe.
Well, and I know what this group would also say, but they would also say, Tony, look, you're African American, you're talented, you're smart. See, America offers you all the same opportunity. Look at you're successful. Engineering, you did it. Why can't the others do it?
So, okay, that's kind of the funny thing is because one person did it, does that mean that that opportunity is there for everyone? I had some very specific events that happened in my life that gave me that opportunity. And I'm also very aware, and we've actually had this conversation recently amongst my white colleagues, that in my industry, I have to work harder and be more talented to get the same results that they do. And they are aware of that. They turned a blind eye to it for a while, but they started to come back to me and go, wow, I see it now. I see that opportunity often is far more relational than just, all over the place. So if you know someone who can give you that inroad, you're more likely to have it. And people know people like themselves. So, here's the reality. It's a cop-out. I mean, let's some of it is just a cop-out. And, if we really, all right, here, let me drink some water. So I'm going to say what I really think. Because if we were doing this at about 5 hours later, this would be bourbon.
Are you sure? Is it? It's not already that?
Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, good, good. Well, hopefully you feel better now. Go ahead, spit it out.
Yeah. Let me spit it out. Here's the deal. There's a researcher at Cornell University named Anthony Burroughs. He's got this great project going on, and what he's realized is that the more people are in tune with their purpose in life and their value system, and the more they're aligned to it, the less they are likely to be racist, xenophobic, misogynistic, homophobic down the line, right? The more you're aligned with your purpose and your value system, the less likely you're going to be to do these other things. The reality is when we're not happy with life, we need somebody to look down on. That's the bottom line. If you really want to go there. And so a lot of times it's like, well, this isn't fair, this isn't fair, this isn't fair. You know what? When you're happy with your life, you don't spend a lot of your time worrying about other people.
Yeah.
But when you're not, you need to look for somebody to blame.
Tony, I'm a man of solutions, and one of the reasons I really wanted you on this show was to see if we, just two average guys could come up with it. And I've been thinking about this rather hard, and tell me if I'm going down the right track. How do we change this so a George Floyd doesn't get a knee in the neck in the future? I sit there and think about this and really wonder that this is really all about police protocol. And what I mean about this is that I think this is a case of where, you talked about being pulled over, and many African Americans, the majority of them, go through this on a daily basis. What if, hear me out on this, if the proposal be a national proposal that, and we'll use it just from people getting pulled over, we'll begin there, that there is a national protocol that when you get pulled over, I don't care if you're in Beverly Hills, I don't care if you're in Manhattan, or I don't care you're in Florida. This is the rules of engagement that we all have to follow. So I get pulled over, the first thing, and again, I don't know what the right order of this is. We all put our hands on the steering wheel, whatever it might be, and we go through certain steps, and everyone is on the same page of this, whether you live in, the East Coast or you live on the West Coast. We all know what this protocol is. And then the police know what that is. And then we have to have steps when Randy decides to bolt out of his car because he's on probation. What do the police do at that moment? Do they let him go? Do they arrest him? Do they pin him to the ground? But it seems to me what we're really arguing about, and many people have lost their lives tragically, is really, we talk about it as police brutality, which it is, but I guarantee you this is what they're being taught at the police academy and other institutions on how to handle this. And I think we need to go back that as a police officer, you don't get to empty your entire clip into the guy you pulled over.
A lot of those protocols are already there. I mean, we don't really need to rewrite the system. I mean, honestly, and I say that as one who works with law enforcement. So a lot of that's basic. That is like basic police training, right? The problem is you have a lot of problems. The problem is I think there needs to be better screening to become a police officer. Number one, I think that you've got to look at what are the criteria for application and getting into the academy. I think it has to be, not only educational, there definitely has to be a background check. There has to be a psychological evaluation, which, I think there also has to be an ongoing psychological evaluation because, when people say, well, police work is hard, you doggone right it is. Being a police officer is tough. And the stuff you really see, and, when I say my friend group, I play basketball with NYPD. So we're buddies, and they'll just be like, dude, I feel so desensitized, right? And so you have to start saying, okay, there's got to be ongoing evaluations because there's all sorts of trauma that they go through. But the other parts of it are there has to be repercussions, just like in any other situation. Because the problem is right now is police, when they don't follow the protocol, there's no real repercussion. Okay, they may get leave with pay, okay? Or there may be a police review board that's primarily a review board of police. Or okay, then they may actually, maybe they'll lose their job and get hired by another police department. I mean, when you start to really say, okay, what are the deterrents to keep people from not following protocol? Because some of the protocol doesn't need to change. I think that's really a big one. I think the other thing, and this is starting to come out when people start talking about police reform right now, not everything is a police issue, right? If you have a situation that's a mental health issue, it's not reasonable for police to be the first responders. Number one, they're not trained to do that. They don't have the right mindset to do that. They don't have the skill set to do that. And they're in a policing mindset. So I think it's a very deep problem to unravel. There are definitely some solutions. Part of it is definitely figuring out who should be a police officer, why they should stay a police officer, what are the repercussions when they don't follow protocol, what should they be first responders to, why are the police so militarized right now? There's so many things. I wish there was a simple solution. But there's not. But I don't. The idea of protocol. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I don't think the protocols are even across the country. I think they vary from state to state. And I think there are different rules for the white guy as opposed to the black guy. The white woman in Beverly Hills, they're treating her differently. And what I think I'm saying is, with my idea, I think it's got to be universal. It's like your Miranda rights. You must be read these rights. If you're not, there's a good chance you're going to get off. And I think it isn't universal from Utah to New York. It varies. And I think, and again, I'm using the example of getting pulled over. Just, every situation would be different. But I think there has to be a protocol that you're supposed to follow and the police are supposed to follow. I agree with you. If they break it, there has to be repercussions, just like there is with the Miranda rights. There's no question. But then there also has to be fairness. If I get out and run from you, what do I do as a police officer? How do I stop you? How do I prevent you from then running into someone's house and grabbing someone, by the throat, and now that we've jeopardized someone else? I think all this is so sketchy, and I don't think police are taught what to do or to do it in a way where they don't empty their clip into the black guy's body. I just think it's whatever happens.
Okay, and I agree with you partly. I do think that there are not standardized protocol across the board.
Why would that be bad? Why would that be bad?
No, I agree. I'm saying that there should be. I agree with you. I think that it does not exist right now, and I think it should be standardized. But I also realize, dude, there's a lot of black people who never get the Miranda rights read to them. I mean, it's just
then that's wrong.
Happen.
Wrong.
It's absolutely wrong. Yeah. But there has to be repercussions to it as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, but I think you are addressing the right issue, and that the issue is policing needs to be universally applied.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is what we have to figure out. And I think maybe part of it is our universal protocols for certain. Police are certainly undertrained without question. There's a whole, this is an artichoke if you really start to unravel it. But, the problem is you can't legislate morality very well.
Yeah.
You'll also have to really figure out who to bring in. And without repercussions, there's a problem. So I think I agree with you on the right track, that the solution has to end up in universal policing, right? That there has to be a standard that we all go through, because it's crazy that, when many white people get pulled over on the highway, they're thinking, okay, how do I get out of this ticket, right? When I get pulled over, even though I train law enforcement, I'm thinking, how do I survive this encounter?
Right. Yeah.
And that's just real.
Yeah, no, and I think we need to even that out is what I'm proposing. And I think people that are much smarter than I am, I'm just a dummy sitting here, but I'm looking at this. And to me, this is a real issue of protocol and what you're saying. We need to hire people that are good at this job, dealing with people, paid more to do it. And we just need to treat everyone the same. And on the other end of it for the police, if you're going to start resisting arrest, you're going to start kicking the police officer, you're going to start pushing them. What do we do with that person? How do we restrain them without killing them? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. Police have shown that they have the capability of doing that, right? It's just when they choose to not do it. It's George Floyd. And now all sorts of stuff is coming out. A, he was not resisting arrest, right? B, the police were called because, and I don't even know how it went down, because it wasn't a bad check, but it was a counterfeit bill that even the owner of the store was like, I don't even know if he knew it was a counterfeit bill because he comes here all the time. But so he's dealt with this way. And yet you have a Dylan Roof who comes up and shoots people in a black church. The police have no problem catching a person who is armed and dangerous, and not only catching him alive, but taking him to Burger King. I mean, it's not that they don't have the skill set, it's their choice in how they apply that skill set.
No, you're absolutely right. Tony, I love your perspective. You're just a great guy to talk to, and I think we can learn a lot from you. And you've written books about positivity, and I think you're a guy that really, you're showing that there's hope for all of us in this. I think you truly believe that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate being on the show. I think that we're at, a tipping point of a time. 2 weeks ago, I was very exhausted and conflicted. I think I'm still cautious, but I'm a lot more hopeful. But I also understand there's a lot of work. But I think we're seeing true humanity, so that and let's be honest. Sometimes when we're focusing on the bad parts of it and the bad people, it's far more of a minority than we give it credit for being. It's just loud voices, right?
So agree.
So you and I are talking about, quote unquote, and I'm going to use this phrase, quote unquote, bad white people, but we're talking about a very narrow sliver of that population, right? Very narrow. But we have to address it. But we're also seeing a lot of good of humanity, right? And that good needs to be educated. But we're seeing it in a way that we may have not seen it 3 months ago. And that gives me a lot of hope.
No, I so agree with you. I think we're, I don't know if this is a way to put it, but I don't think we're as racist as we think we are. It is a group of people. And I think it's changing, which you said earlier, this generation. You got to remember there's also a group of people still on this planet that were, a part of black people using a separate bathroom. I mean, so for them to see African Americans having the same rights and choices, it freaks them out. They don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and we're not only do we have a group of people who've seen that, we have a group of people who witnessed it at a young age and are now in decision-making positions.
Yeah.
I apologize. I think that may be mine. So this is the problem of doing this.
Hey, are you getting a little interference there? Well, just can you get rid of it or?
No, it's not interference.
Okay.
It is literally someone vacuuming outside my door. You can give it that's what I said. This is the problem with home studios.
I know. I'm amazed this hasn't happened on network television time after time. I know. It's amazing. Oh, well,
I thought it would be worse because I literally live down the street from the fire department, right? I mean, I see them every day. We talk and everything.
Right.
So every hour you hear a fire truck because it's got to literally come past my apartment. So, hey, unfortunately, I'm sorry this went the way it did on this part.
No, don't worry about it. Hey, what's the name of the book, Tony?
The name of the book is called The Force Multiplier: How to Lead Teams Where Everyone Wins. And really what it is, it's about how to be a leader. Really, okay, what it's about is how can you be a good person and how can you influence people? And it not only applies to work, it applies to parenting, it applies to marriages, it applies to just being in the community. It applies to how do you have really good relationships is really what it's about.
Tony Chatman, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. You're a great guest, and thanks for taking time to chat with us.
Hey, Randy, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it, and look forward to the next time where we can do it, maybe in person and not in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, so. We'll have you here in the studio. All right, we're out of here.
No more Roach on Florida TV.